Well, it's been nearly 2 weeks since Texas faced freezing temperatures and was plunged into darkness. Now that the state is warming up and lights are turning on, the search for answers begins. And President Biden heads down to the state today to discuss recovery efforts. Bloomberg oil and gas reporter Rachel Adams-Hurd joins me now from Houston. Hey, Rachel, it's great to have you on the show. You were in the thick of this. You were experiencing this over the last 2 weeks. I want to start with Biden before getting to your experience. What does the president have planned for his trip today?
So he's going to be in Houston and Harris County. We're the biggest county in the state, and it's really where some of the hardest hit residents lived through last week's disaster. He's going to be visiting food bank. They were in disaster mode for days after the lights came on because as we reported, the outages affected water supply. So a lot of folks didn't have any water at all. And if they did, they had to boil it because the pressure was so low that you're at risk of bacteria. The treatment plants were down. So it really became a humanitarian crisis. And so I think when President Biden comes, it's going to be more of an emergency response type of visit versus him trying to figure out what happened to our grid. That by design is a Texas issue. So I think what we're expecting today is really, kind of the typical presidential visit after a major disaster, which this area is fairly used to at this point.
I do wonder what power the federal government even has. It's something that you explore in your piece that former Secretary of Energy Rick Perry even said it's worth a few days of cold, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, not to have interference from the federal government in our business.
Yes, clearly that got a lot of backlash. When he said it, there were millions of people without power, folks who had been in cold homes for days. So that was not well received by a lot of folks who were being affected by these outages. I do think, though, that there is some truth to the inability of the federal government to really be able to act here. I don't think that Texas is going to open the door for that type of involvement. There are things like maybe funding research and development to batteries and that kind of thing that could offer assistance. But at the end of the day, this is a problem that Texas is going to need to figure out how to fix.
So here we are, almost 2 weeks since the cold snap began in Texas that plunged the state into darkness. What's the conversation happening right now about who's to blame and how and what solutions are available?
Well, we had hearings yesterday in the state legislature, and I think that's the key word is blame. Everyone was finger pointing. It was ERCOT, the grid operator. It was the Public Utility Commission. It's the Railroad Commission, which, unlike its name sounds, actually regulates our oil and gas industry. Legislators pointing at utilities pointing at legislators, and everyone kind of looking at how the oil and gas industry was involved. It was kind of a mess, honestly. And it's going to be hard to figure out how we move forward if everyone's just kind of saying it's the other person's fault. I do think that there's going to be more and more pressure on the Railroad Commission because we're learning the significant role that natural gas played with the supply outages that were part of a lot of these outages. So I think moving forward, we're really going to have to look at the entire system, multiple agencies, different regulators, which utilities were involved, and ultimately there's going to be a lot of financial damage too. So it's a pretty big problem that Texas is going to need to solve.
Rachel, as I mentioned, you were absolutely in the middle of this when this happened and throughout this crisis. You write in your recent piece for Bloomberg Business Week that your parents in Austin were affected. They had no water, and that they were melting snow in order to flush their toilets at one point. How are Texans doing a little over a week later?
I think in Houston, the biggest problem for a lot of folks today remains pipes that were burst. So most people I know who live in Houston and who own a home had pipes burst due to the cold. And that's because our homes are not built to withstand those types of temperatures. So the pipes are exposed. It's not like up north where you have the basement to insulate them. And I heard horror stories of people running around trying to shut off their water as fast as they could, but not before their entire home was damaged.
Bloomberg's Rachel Adams-Hurd in Houston. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for joining us on this.